I've decided to change directions a little bit. I had been reading from the article on the French Revolution from Executive Intelligence Review, and my intention was to give some unknown background as to the French Revolution. And I got into the French Revolution because Saint-Germain is considered to be an instigating force in that event and figures for many people very highly as a spiritual and philosophical agent of change. And then I discovered some interesting links, like discovering that the original impulse behind what came to be known as the French Revolution, was the American Revolution, and the spiritual and philosophical identity in happiness and freedom, individual sovereignty. And then I found some very interesting information linking Saint-Germain himself to the American Revolution, which I think I will get into next time. And as you may or may not know, most people agree that Saint-Germain, as a way of I'm trying to segue into the topic of this video. Most scholars, there's general consensus that Saint-Germain was from Transylvania, which is the central region of Romania, and that he was a nobleman and the son of Prince Rákóczi, who spearheaded and led an independence movement resisting Habsburg control, and that this accounts for le Comte de Saint-Germain's apparently inexhaustible wealth and his aristocratic bearing, education, and his ability to be accepted by and to blend in with and to relate on a peer-to-peer level with the monarchs of Europe and the royal families of Europe. Now, my fascination with Romania, I'm not quite sure. I was trying to remember where that came from, but sometime last year I became fascinated with Romania. And so it was, of course, exciting for me to discover this connection between Saint-Germain and Transylvania. And in the course of doing research and looking into Romania, with the aim of visiting there, going there, learning Romanian, I came across some interesting videos by interviews with a man called Peter Moon, who I knew had written several books on the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia Experiment Montauk Project. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. And I've never known quite what to make of this. But he gave an interview about Romania, about a discovery in 2003 of a chamber inside of Mount Bucege, or Monte Bucege in Transylvanian, I think under the Romanian, what they understand and what people call the Romanian Sphinx. And it's a chamber that was discovered by satellite, and it was extremely anomalous, and the Pentagon was surprised to discover this chamber. Word of this chamber then leaked or was transmitted very quickly to the P2 Freemason Lodge in Italy, which is perhaps the most powerful Freemasonic lodge in the world. And they sent an emissary, or rather, I think it is maybe the top person at the Freemason Lodge, went to Romania and had a conversation with a young man who was kind of the chief expert, I would say, in a department of Romanian Intelligence called Department Zero. And it was extremely top secret. Oh, there was the head of security who knew about it, the president at that time, Ceausescu, when it was founded, although he was later removed from office. But at the time, there was Ceausescu and the head of security, and then there was this young guy who had been watched for his special abilities, an unusual personality since he was born. And there's a lot to go into there, and I will at some point go into more detail. But for this purpose, just suffice it to say that there's a fascinating conversation. And I'm bringing this up, I'm going off in several different directions because I'm trying to establish and frame the sort of a meta-historical view. Yeah, that might sound a bit pretentious, meta-historical, I know. Well, in the sense that what is the bigger drama being played out? We know that Saint-Germain was a Freemason. Some people say he discovered Freemasonry or is the father of Freemasonry. But we also see those people who dig and aren't satisfied with easy answers. We often come up against Freemasonry as being a prime cause of many calamitous events, many precipitous, difficult, dramatic events in human history. Certainly in the French Revolution, we went into that a little bit. Now, in this book, in this reading I'm going to do, we have Signore Massini, who comes from the P2 Freemason Lodge, who flies to Romania and has a direct meeting with this young man who is a psychic and highly gifted, top-level Romanian intelligence operative, and explains to him, they have two meetings, but in the first meeting he says, look, we would really love to have you at our Bilderberg, in our Bilderberg organization, and we want to present you with this option of joining us. And he says, but it's not really an option. You don't really have a choice. You have to understand this. Basically, you can come join us, and then your life will be absolutely wonderful. You'll have all the money you want, all the prestige, all the anything you want. The sky's the limit. Or you can resist us, and we'll find a way to discredit you and destroy you, and you'll end up in oblivion. So that's kind of how the game is played. And this Romanian operative, extremely brilliant and extremely intuitive, psychic young man, and he's only 21 at this time. Let's go back. I like this one more. He thinks to himself, well, if I resist the direction that Signore Massini is leading me, then there may be some serious repercussions here, because he's obviously a person of, he's an extremely powerful individual, extremely arrogant, extremely sure of himself, very imposing, but very egotistical. And he says, I think I can play into his egotism and use this conversation as a chance to get information about his organization, of which I know very little. So he decides to sort of walk the razor-sharp line to try to get information from Signore Massini about high-level Freemasonry, while giving him the impression that he's very interested in the offer and joining. And we find out later in the second meeting that Signore Massini is particularly interested in this discovery in the in Bucege, in the Mount Bucege, this strange, apparently artificial chamber that was recently discovered. What's in there? How do they gain access to it? That perhaps it contains extremely high level, very powerful, world-changing contents. Something is in that chamber. Signore Massini is very interested in gaining access to it and containing the information that may come out of the exploration of this chamber. So he wants to control whatever he fears may be in there. He wants absolute control of whatever's in there, sensing that it could be something of world-changing consequences. So, in the first conversation, Cezar Brad induces Signore Massini to explain to him how the Freemasons are able to exert control over humanity and guide humanity in their toward their intended objectives. And I thought that this is important for our investigation, because, as I said in a couple of videos past, that I think there's a light and a dark in Freemasonry. On the one hand, there's incredible amounts of information. Perhaps some of it is false. That the intention of high-level Freemasonry is the enslavement and degradation of humankind and depopulation. On the other hand, we see perhaps the most prominent, or one of the most prominent Freemasons, le Comte de St, standing for freedom and happiness and light and the uplifting of humanity. So I began to think about perhaps it's a kind of a double movement going on at all times. And in the second conversation, he does go into and elucidate the relationship between good and evil. But in this part that I think I may have just enough time, I don't want to go over in, let's say, 45 minutes on this video, but I found the contents of this to be quite shocking. Not only is it feels like getting punched in the stomach, but for me it was also because I had been wondering about these things and coming to similar conclusions and having suspicions that this passage in this book, which is called Transylvanian Sunrise. Now, Transylvanian Sunrise was written by a Romanian writer, Radu Cinamar, who was approached by Cezar Brad to tell his story, which he felt he owed it to humanity to tell everyone the truth. Because there were many Romanians at the time, Cezar Brad among them, who subsequently to the events which I will tell you about in terms of discovering this chamber, who feel bitter and thwarted and perceive a great injustice being done to not only the Romanian people but to the world, because Romanians felt that the discovery, what was found, in the chamber in Mount Lucege was something that all humanity needed to know about and pertained to everyone. And the information therein apparently would change humanity's view of itself, perhaps 180 degrees. We can get into that another time. But out of this sense of injustice and wanting to do what he could, he decided to tell his story to this Romanian writer, who then had it translated into English and sent to Peter Moon to have it published in the United States. So that's the story. It's not a book by Peter Moon. It's a book that Peter Moon, I think he cleaned up the translation, although it's the English in it is a bit funny in places. So I'm just going to warn you. But nevertheless, an extremely powerful book. And this passage, I think, is important to understand perhaps what Saint-Germain was up against. How he could have been this violet flame that instigated the shift in humanity toward freedom. And that in the case of the American Revolution, certainly down the line, it was arguably 50% subverted. And at times, what America stood for initially, or what its founding principles were absolutely obliterated by unscrupulous forces within the government and outside influences. But here we have also, as we just discussed the last few videos on the French Revolution, Saint-Germain is implicated here too, and that he was present at the birth, the creative spark, that violet flame, the moment of the impulse behind what was supposed to be a peaceful transition, and then having that sort of be unraveled by unscrupulous forces in other wings, other lodges, other strains of Freemasonry, tied up with international finance and just sort of brute subversive asymmetrical tactics. So that's why I think this is important, because I think this characterizes and anatomizes what the forces of darkness are and how they operate and what they do. And so I think this is an extremely important passage. It's rather long. We'll see if I can get through this, and here we go. Here we have the cover of Transylvanian Sunrise, Radu Cinamar with Peter Moon. I downloaded it for free. It's very easy to find, the PDF. The introduction is by Peter Moon. All right. Now, this is the first meeting with Signore Massini and Cezar Brad, who Signore Massini shows up at the facilities, the intelligence facilities. So, at about 3 in the afternoon, a Romanian Intelligence Services helicopter landed at the base in Valea Ursului. Out came a tall and sober gentleman in a black suit. He was poised and haughtily so. In his right hand he was carrying a walking stick with an ivory handle, ornately carved in gold. His face betrayed a tough character, and his green eyes had an almost strange effect, radiating an unusual coldness. This impression was made even stronger by his arched and way too well-groomed eyebrows for a man of rather advanced age. He introduced himself to the officers who were waiting for him at the base as Signore Massini, and waited patiently for his arrival to be announced to Cezar. Of stately manner, as if being used to living only in high, noble circles, Signore Massini, aged 65, was overbearing in conduct, very self-confident, and gave the impression of a man who was used to lording it over people. In fact, he was one of the highest-ranking venerables of the most important Freemason lodge in Europe, and also a member of the most influential Freemasonic organization at world level, the Bilderberg Group. Signore, and this was back 2003, not many people knew about the Bilderberg Group. Now it's pretty much, lots of people know about it. Signore Massini was shown to the first floor of the base where Cezar was waiting for him. After the customary introductions, Cezar invited him to a protocol room, but the venerable one refused. Without being fastidious, his turn of phrase was rather stilted and slightly dated. In fact, Signore Massini was a member of a very old noble family of royal descent from Italy. I am impressed and at the same time delighted with your proposal, but I retain the basic privilege to protect myself against likely attempts at wiretapping our discussion. I should be most grateful if you do not take personal umbrage at the request, but we cannot forget we are dealing here with the Romanian Intelligence Service. The venerable one explained. Cezar gave a faint smile. It was still difficult to assess whether that was Signore Massini's habitual manner of speech, or his words concealed a trace of irony. The second interpretation was more likely, but that did not bother Cezar at all. Instead, he replied in goodwill, I understand your fears, sir, and I find them warranted to a certain extent, but given its status, this base has a very high security level, and not only cooperates with the Romanian Intelligence Services, it is not subordinate, and only cooperates with the Romanian Intelligence Services. It is not subordinate to it. Therefore, we can talk in peace without any fear of anything in the protocol room. But Signore Massini stood firm in his request. He insisted politely that the discussion take place in the open, at a convenient distance away from the base. He said that was in the interest of both parties. As the request was not that excessive, Cezar gave his consent. A small clearing was chosen about 250 meters away from the surface building of the base. A table and 2 chairs were taken to the spot, and at a certain distance from the arrangement, Cezar ordered the presence in a circle of 8 bodyguards specialized in high-level protection services. In fact, they were members of the 3rd Special Intervention Team in case of K-type events. K-type events are very strange, anomalous, supernatural sort of events that are reported to Romanian intelligence services, and they are then called to investigate, find out what exactly is behind these very strange events. A high-tech electronic jamming device was also installed. Preparations took almost 1 hour, during which time Signore Massini spoke only a couple of phrases and displayed a slightly sneering and ironic smile. From time to time he gave darting looks in Cezar's direction, trying to take his measure quickly but carefully. At about 4 in the afternoon, preparations were ready, and the two took a seat at the table in the clearing. Cezar told me that from a certain point of view, the situation was rather bizarre. A gentleman of incontrovertible influence at the highest political levels had requested a highly secret meeting with the executive director of the most occult department of the Romanian secret services. All doors had been opened almost effortlessly, and all requests approved immediately. What could be the nature of that mysterious influence that had broken even through the highest political circles of a state? What, in fact, was the purpose of Signore Massini's unforeseen and secret visit, and what was he after, particularly since he had avoided any interference by the Romanian Intelligence Service that had actually facilitated the meeting? The strict order received from the government forbade any interference on the part of the Romanian Intelligence Services with the discussion, all on the grounds of secrecy in Department Zero's field of action. Despite all that, the situation was rather strange, because it gave the impression of intervention by an external power that was imposed on the Romanian state. Moreover, No wiretapping of the talks between the two was allowed, and Cezar wanted to keep the promise he had made to Signore Massini. On the other hand, even if the Romanian Intelligence Services had the technical means necessary for wiretapping the talks, the Venerable Massini's arrival had been announced hastily, thus leaving little time for the preparation of such sensitive action. In addition, given the influence that Signore Massini seemed to have at the highest political level in Romania, some likely dissatisfaction on his part might have had consequences of the most adverse kind on those who would have made such a decision in the Romanian Intelligence Services. Therefore, strange though it might seem, Signore Massini had succeeded through quick, intense, and demanding action in getting, in record time, the maximum security for the talk he wanted to have with Cezar. The encounter between the two was to reveal the most sensational account of occult truths that are nevertheless manifest more and more in the daily lives of people throughout the world. That is, we see almost month by month now that these secret workings are exposing themselves to a greater and greater degree, forcing a perhaps more direct psychological confrontation. All right, moving on. The test. I'm here to have this talk with you, Mr. Brad, in a less than usual way and under special circumstances, said the Venerable Massini, getting straight to the point. In our view, people belong to one of two categories: those who can be manipulated and led around, and the great majority belong to this category, and those who have certain virtues, are gifted with certain powers, and have very strong personality. I shall interrupt for a short clarification. Cezar chipped in apparent naivete. He's faking. He's apparent now. He's trying to seem a bit more naive than he actually is. Whose opinion do you actually represent here? Signore Massini gave a large smile, leaning slowly back against the back of his chair. His whole attitude was the expression of the proud conscience of an unconquerable power. Mr. Brad, you are a young man in the prime of your life, holding a position that is paradoxically a dungeon for civil liberties, but at the same time gives you the satisfaction of knowing and looking into things about which almost nobody knows anything. Such a position is difficult to get because it requires safeguards of remarkable inner abilities. Thank you, Cezar said, amiably but cautiously. And yet, even to a very well-endowed person like you, quite a lot of things remain unknown, and some of these can be extremely attractive. The group I represent and on whose behalf I've come here today is part of the highest Masonic order and highly interested in the outcome of our talks. I'm aware of some things about Freemasonry, said Cezar. The organization is built on a pyramidal hierarchy, has very occult initiation rituals, and its real intentions are obscure to most people. For the 2 or 3 sentences you have just uttered, not even I could have done better, my dear, said the Venerable Massini, giving a superior and slightly ironic laugh. I'm a master of the most powerful Masonic lodge in the world, and while this must remain a well-kept secret to most, it would be superfluous to keep it from you because the issue I want to talk with you about goes way beyond the importance of my occult position. On the contrary, it is absolutely necessary that you know to whom you are talking from the very beginning. In giving this account of the meeting, Cezar told me, this is the writer talking now, Radu Cinamar. Cezar, the Romanian, told me that this was the precise moment when he realized what the purpose of Massini's visit was, as well as the way in which the meeting was to proceed. At that moment, he also knew what he would do next and what strategy to employ in order to learn and understand as much as possible about the twists and turns of the Freemason organization. In fact, this was to be a battle of wits between the two, and where a lot of giving and taking was to take place, all of which had to be carefully orchestrated because the forces at play and the consequences that could follow were huge. At first, Cezar set himself the goal of exploring a territory where he had already noticed a weakness on Venerable Massini's part, his self-pride and an inflated ego, both of which could strategically diminish his vigilance and inner strength. Therefore, that's very interesting to me, because it seems that in being an agent for the light, being an agent for truth, and for the good, psychological awareness, psychological prowess is extremely important, and it's something that all of us can develop. Cezar has this, and he uses it against a much greater power than himself to gain advantage. Just pointing that out. Therefore, your position in the lodge is one of the highest. I know that the hierarchy follows the 33 so-called degrees. And then Signore Massini responds. The Bilderberg group is not exactly a lodge. It is a lot more than that, but I will not go into details now. Indeed, at lodge level, hierarchy follows these 33 degrees, and promotion must meet clear requirements. You should also know these degrees are a sort of facade. Real power goes way beyond the 33 hierarchical degrees and involves other requirements that I can tell you about, but only under certain circumstances. It is up to you alone to be open to such a situation. Imagine a big house. In order for it to look as nice as possible, it must be painted elegantly with great care for details. By way of analogy, these would be the initiation levels. Most of the riches and the biggest secrets, however, are inside the house, unseen and unknown, but to the masters of the house, who are very few in number and act as the power behind the smooth operation of the entire building, its maintenance, administration, and prosperity. In order for this to happen, they need not be known by the other people, nor must their ways and means be known. You are an intelligent man, and you can easily understand what I mean. Cezar had noted that Signore Massini's turn of phrase had gradually moved to a more familiar and straightforward tone. That could be an advantage, because familiarity in discussion could breed the disclosure of many secrets. The age gap between the two obviously contributed to that kind of tone. Undoubtedly, the Venerable Massini displayed great vital strength and an unusual psychic force in stark contrast to his respectable age. Unfortunately, his subtle radiation, whereby the Venerable One could at any time dominate ordinary human beings who are weak or physically or mentally unstable in their great majority, was gathered around his immense self-pride, arrogance, and a feeling of superiority, perhaps justified by his noble descent. That is why, regardless of Cezar's merits and good references, which one could assume were well known to the elite of the Bilderberg group, the Venerable Massini could not restrain his self-pride. We have requested this meeting using our power and connections because we are fully aware of your force and abilities, by which we set great store, particularly if they serve our interests. In saying that, the Venerable One made the first important move in the game between the two. As will be noted, however, the wheeling and dealing was to prove a lot more complicated than a simple indirect proposal for cooperation at the highest Masonic level. Mr. Massini, if I am to understand anything in particular, and if the problem is to be approached in a specific manner, then please say so from the very beginning. For instance, what is the main reason for which you want me to be a member of the Bilderberg group? Signore Massini's attitude turned suddenly cold, and his voice took on a very grave undertone. Is this really a problem for you, Mr. Brad? Do you imagine you are free to choose or set conditions? And who said you would become a member of the Bilderberg group? Do you have any idea who its members really are and what the access criteria are at that level? You are very far away from this hierarchical position, and moreover, you will never be able to be part of the group's close circles for reasons which, if I told you about, would leave you utterly mystified. They are not part of this world. Therefore, please come back to more mundane ideas and understand that the indirect proposal I have made concerns your becoming a member of one of the highest Masonic lodges in the world, directly subordinate to the Bilderberg group. Our organization could use your special contribution. The fact that I, myself, have come here to have this private talk with you will make you understand we appreciate you a lot. Judging by the information we have, I must admit your powers and abilities are impressive. As I was telling you, we're interested in cooperating with you. There is a secret council at the level of this lodge that makes proposals for the main lines of action in the world, which the Bilderberg group then assess. It works like a sort of feedback loop. You could be an important driving force in that council, and you could acquire anything you have ever dreamed of in this world, and rule over everything you want. Wealth, people, luxury, laws, even governments, nothing could stop you. We do not negotiate because what we offer is huge. What would be the point in having any other useless discussions when things are so clear? And to be honest, there is no other option for you but to take our offer. In saying that with unflinching self-confidence, the Venerable Massini made a specific gesture, stretching his hand as if cutting through the air. It might be that someone in Cezar's shoes would have been intimidated and even bewildered both by the speed at which the conversation had advanced and by the fabulous perspectives lying in wait. Cezar told me, the writer, that had been a turning point of the meeting. Complex though it appeared, the problem had only two obvious solutions. Either he took the offer, which meant membership in the Masonic organization and quick promotion to its highest levels, or he could turn it down, which would have triggered an unpredictable chain of adverse consequences both for himself and the activity of Department Zero. At that moment, Cezar was not aware of the main data on Freemasonry's topmost interest, but he was interested to find out about them, so as to be able to understand the occult reasons for action on the part of this worldwide organization and the ways and means whereby it wanted to attain its goals. The circumstances seemed favorable to him, and the discussion had got to a point where, step by step, he could steer it toward what he was interested in. He would do this by whetting Signore Massini's appetite for self-pride and power. The task, however, was not at all an easy one, because the venerable one was a very shrewd interlocutor with lots of brains and mental vigor on top. Unfortunately, those qualities were already channeled down a deeply negative direction. Cezar had the intuition that if he had turned down the proposal right away, the game would have been over and Signore Massini would have left without any plea for reconsideration. Cezar would not have had the chance of finding out anything more, and the consequences of his refusal would have been unpredictable. He therefore made the decision to deceive the Venerable One's vigilance and under cover of acceptance, learn as much as possible about the backstage dealings of worldwide Freemasonry. From a certain perspective, he then took on the role of an undercover kamikaze, but he felt self-confident and trusted his ability to deal with any difficulties that might have come up. Then we get into the meat of this chapter. What you're telling me is very exciting, Mr. Massini. However, I should like to understand how it was and is possible that you have such great influence. I must confess I find this to be very interesting. Satisfied with this twist in the conversation, Signore Massini gave a solicitous reply, apparently falling into the quite simple trap Cezar had laid. Well, my dear, there are lots of ways to get influence, and this is an area we master to perfection. The main quality it takes is patience. One cannot build up grand and elegant palaces and then enjoy all the attendant pleasures unless one is tenacious, vigilant, and above all patient, even in the face of apparent failure. It takes time for everything to fall into place, and sometimes it can be very long until that happens. Our venerable masters of yore had a great overall vision of the final outcome to which we are getting now closer and closer. They didn't greedily pursue mean, selfish interests, but fought with all their might to strengthen and reinforce Masonic foundations by adapting its guidelines to the course of human evolution. In fact, why would they have only looked after themselves and their families? Weren't they the richest, wealthiest, and best off of all people anyway? Hadn't they made an oath to help and support one another when in need? I can tell you they were the real architects of the principles now governing the social system. But for the time being, I can't disclose much about these architects who devised the entire plan as long as several thousand years ago, because that is a terrible secret of which not even all the members of the Bilderberg group are aware. In modern times, and by this I mean the past 200 or 300 years, the Venerable Masters have done nothing but apply in an intelligent manner the basic principles that had already been established and adapted these to the structure of their times. Their actions have been improved with each generation while at the same time keeping the same drive and initial ideas. You must know that at the top of our hierarchy there are only people of royal descent whose lineage one can trace back in genealogical trees as old as hundreds or even thousands of years. We pay great attention to this issue so as not to get mixed up with other races. Despite all this, however, there have been exceptions, but gradually we have succeeded in eliminating recessive genes. And then Cezar interrupts. You must be talking about royal families across Europe and the great bankers at the end of the Middle Ages? Asked Cezar in an attempt to prepare the ground for more details on the issue. Precisely. They were not revolutionaries. They didn't uphold any hard and fast ideology or any specific and convoluted philosophy. Their force has never lain in their brawn or their go-getting spirit. They have never produced heroes or spearheads. Instead, they were quick to understand that in order to succeed, they needed a different algorithm, drawing its strength from the very force, actions, and decisions of people. They were keen observers and made some essential points from the very beginning. They noticed, for instance, that community life, whether it is grounded in monarchies, republics, or any other type of governance, is based on leadership. This reality involves two so-called groups. On the one hand, the masses, or the rabble, that is the majority of people, and on the other hand, the elite, who one way or another strive to shepherd the herd. This simple observation was the foundation on which they built their entire plan. But why is it so important to them that people were split into those two categories? Cezar asked quickly. Like a genuine Masonic master initiated into the obscure secrets of the organization of which he was a member, Signore Massini started to reveal the very ideological core of Freemasonry at world level. This reality is and was very important due to the fact that there have always been conflicting interests between the two groups. The situation had to be made to work out so that those conflicting interests could never disappear completely, or in other words, so that there would never be genuine peace among people. In order for this to be the case, it was necessary to pander to both groups by various methods without their knowledge of the scheme. Our Illuminati have taken this ability to perfection, in that they could run with the hare and hunt with the hound, and yet never fail in this double game. Cezar then seized the opportunity to keep the pot boiling. But how could they? How could they do it? He asked. What were their methods? They needed some strong levers, and at the origin of their actions lay only two: money and man's inferior nature that makes him give in to temptations of all kinds. That has always been a successful combination, because what was not good in one case was so in another. That is how this recipe, drawing on scheming, lies, temptations, and pretense, allowed our influence to spread throughout the world. In today's world, we must of course factor in a series of other issues. Among the most important of these are the number of this planet's inhabitants, as well as remarkable technological progress. Basically, however, the foundations of our Masonic organization were laid a long time ago, and they are so firm and now so deeply ingrained in people's consciousness that the full achievement of our program is now only a matter of time. Signore Massini ended his lecture with a satisfied smile on his face and lit a long cigar. Obviously, he was waiting for his words to take their effect on Cezar. Playing along, Cezar made a statement. But I fail to understand the main reason for which this huge effort has been made for thousands and thousands of years. Puffing slowly on his cigar, Signore Massini looked at Cezar through his half-closed eyelids. In his unbounded self-pride, he had already considered his approach to have been fully successful. Cezar, on the other hand, thought that erroneous view had weakened the Venerable One's vigilance and prompted him to push ahead with a profusion of explanations. That is quite simple, my dear. Power was and always will be the main reason. What else could we possibly want after so long a time? Come on, tell me, don't be shy. Money. Almost all the money in this world is ours, thanks to the banking web we have been weaving for the past centuries. Since civilizations thrived, we have been intent on creating a social system where people fully depend on their income. Money, more and more money, that's the name of the game, a fixation that had to be spread everywhere. But in order to have money, one must produce. And in order to produce, one must work. And work requires time. These are the terms of our equation, which in fact is a vicious circle, a puzzle with no solution attached. The result was that people ended up working themselves to exhaustion for us, always under the spell of more and more money that is, in fact, easily spent in keeping with the world's rhythm and its assorted attractions. And yet, no matter how much money one could earn, the real wealth and the bulk of the money are ours, are in our possession, well kept in our banks or invested in title deeds. Even if 10 or 100 people who are not members of our lodges get extremely wealthy, they are not a threat because they are discrete entities who do not pursue any definite large-scale goal. Of course, we are careful to lure most of them to our organization from the very beginning of their brilliant careers and thereby increase our power. Those who turn down our offer can't hold out on their own for very long. If, one way or another, they become a threat, we join efforts to force them into bankruptcy, even at the risk of some losses on our side. But the huge financial machinery we have built allows us to redress the financial balance quickly through increases somewhere else. The aim is to bring down the person in question. Usually, when they're just about to collapse and feel lost beyond retrieve, the tactics are to give them a second chance to take the offer they initially turned down. Most often they accept. And then, of course, their personal business makes a spectacular comeback. But at that point, they must already comply with clear conditions that we set and cannot be avoided. We always stand to gain, whether it be an influential politician to further our interests, which is the most frequent and almost easiest case to fabricate, or a great businessman, most of whose money we administer through our own networks. It is therefore our interest to create as many such vicious circles as possible. And it is on this foundation that we have built modern society and the so-called cell of society, that is, the family which we have chained to an infinite set of dependencies. Jobs, houses, comfort, cars, bank loans, and long-term contractual obligations that sometimes extend over 1 or 2 generations of the respective family. The role of a vicious circle is to make people dependent, because when this happens, they are no longer free. Dependence automatically triggers a sort of enslavement or limitation. And we need people to be as limited and mechanical as possible in their actions, which must become almost stereotypical. This was the main reason why we have gradually imposed a sort of labor specialization extending over as many fields and subfields as possible. If job requirements are simple, almost minimal, but repetitive, the job holder will soon become a submissive and obedient machine. We do not want people to think too much. Thinking can become dangerous and spawn ideas that run counter to our goals. That is why we have sought to extend our control over larger and larger numbers of people, even outside job hours, in their spare time, that is. We have thus allowed technology and innovation to capture the attention of the masses by means of the lack of which would be synonymous with catastrophe today. Television sets, telephones, computers. Our idea has been a howling success because, apart from creating addiction to these technological means, it has also given us control over the spread of information. At present, due to the characteristics of our times, information ranks first as a tool for action in the world. It is then simple to anticipate the next step. By controlling media institutions and tools, we implicitly control the content and quality of information. That is why one of our primary goals has been to gain control over the biggest press, radio, and television trusts in the world. Do you mean all this has been enough to gain control over the world? Cezar asked. Obviously not. The media was only available in a limited area. That is why we needed some more methods of domination that had to be tempting to the masses. We acted like a gray eminence in support of the spread of drugs, synthetic drugs in particular, fully aware that these drugs, together with tobacco, alcohol, and coffee, can destroy the human body. We have deliberately staged a so-called no campaign that has only increased the demand for such substances. We've created huge tobacco, fine beverage, and coffee concerns. Almost all the presidents and owners of these business giants are venerable members of the highest-ranking lodges of our organization, Signore Massini concluded, completely full of satisfaction. All this seems to be a concerted attack against humanity, Cezar said, pretending he had only caught on to the idea. Not at all affected by the purport of the question, the venerable one had a nonchalant reply. My dear, it is already difficult to control and coordinate more than 6 billion people. You must understand that the more dispersed and confused a crowd is, the easier it is to manipulate, to maneuver. If, in addition, it does not go above a certain number of people, then things are quite simple given the mental manipulation technology now available to us. Therefore, what difference do you think it makes if several million people die on a daily basis, most of them from drug-related diseases? The venerable one paused for a short while in his cynical presentation, seemingly pondering over what he would tell Cezar next. One of our primary goals has been to put an end to population growth. Moreover, we had to decrease the world population numbers dramatically. In order to do this, we needed methods that could kill large numbers of people in a very short time. We have financed top-secret research projects for the production of deadly viruses. Some experiments failed, but others have yielded results. Results in terms of damage done naturally? We must look at the issue from a practical point of view. It is the only way we can achieve our aims thoroughly. If something or someone opposes us, they can't hold out against us for too long. As I was telling you, our tools are never in the open. On the contrary, they come in a deeply humane casing, but tap into those soft spots that we ourselves have built into the system and are mostly unknown to people. Our basic hidden source of manipulation is the constitution of a state. The making of a constitution is a real science of human psychology and manipulation, which is why we have been careful to have our representatives involved in the process of the big powers of the world. Constitutions must take on a humane shape, pompous even and relatively complicated, but at the same time encode those effective means for population control and undermining. Conflicts, revolutions, wars in various areas of the globe have perhaps been the most widespread method that we have created and indirectly supported over time. Armed conflicts have always been a real and huge source of income to us, as well as a subtle means of power wielding across the world. We capitalize on any economic or social difficulty, particularly in less developed countries. Owing to our banking influence, we can operate secretly at the top level of power in the respective country and do the same with the adversary state. We never get involved in one direction, as the result can be uncertain. But by enticing both camps to take action, we stand to gain, no matter how their conflict might end. Our times lend themselves particularly to ethnic or economic conflicts. These are simple to trigger, last long, and bring into play numerous other interests on the part of more powerful but rival states. Eventually, the respective war becomes a war among the great powers of the world and less a nationally limited cause. Almost all of the big international bodies, whether they are political or military, are of Masonic origin. Our venerables are there in key positions and follow our plans to the point of precision. And, as I've told you, we are very patient. Decay eats away slowly but surely, even at the thickest tree trunk. The UN and NATO, to name only two of our most influential tools, have turned out to be most welcome decisions on our part. And yet, Signore Massini, there's something I don't quite understand. Cezar said, putting on a vexed look. How could anyone believe that is what is most important in this world, is that what is most important in this world is a direct consequence of the plans and actions of the Masonic organization? That is absurd and even inconceivable. Signore Massini laughed heartily and lit another cigar. He was quietly sizing Cezar up through the clouds of blue-tinged smoke eddying slowly in the cool mountain air. For a moment, Cezar thought he had gone beyond the limit with his hidden intentions, and that the venerable one had caught on to his plan, but his fears were soon dispelled. My dear, this is one of the linchpins of our doctrine. Indeed, my way of presenting things to you makes them seem so absurd and grotesque that the accusations that might be brought against us would seem utterly hilarious. In a way, this is the core of our ideology. Follow the plan, but at the same time, make it all seem as if opposing such a plan. Thus, you can understand more easily why we don't want media attention, honors, fame, or public recognition. All this is transient and is additionally controlled by our very organization through our media leverage. Our success lies in being a group. Our actions do not follow individual interests alone, but are always correlated and clearly targeted. Mutual support and complete discretion are essential ingredients for our success. In fact, the rules and oaths of our organization are very strict and penalties very tough. You must be wondering what makes me speak to you so frankly without any trace of fear and in all confidence. In so doing, I assure you I have assessed it all correctly. Or do you imagine that once in possession of all this information, you can make it known to the entire world? Signore Massini laughed heartily, but his eyes turned cold and hard immediately after. Your power and influence outside are zero, Mr. Brad. Once you have become the object of our attention, you can no longer escape it. The scope of your options is limited. Either you follow us unconditionally or you become a persona non grata. Just think about it. You are alone, disconnected from the outside world and subjected to a maximum security regime. Do you really believe it would be difficult for us to cause your removal if we really wanted it? But why would we do that when you yourself can support our plans? In addition, you will be able to learn things you haven't even imagined, and you will enjoy immunity and absolute protection. From a certain standpoint, you are precious, but what is precious must prove its utility. Therefore, my dear, I can see absolutely no reason for keeping any of our principles and methods from you. That would be tantamount to considering you an ordinary follower with a feeble mind, but that is not true. Moreover, in order for you not to view this approach as too straightforward, which is anyway a special kind in your case, I want this discussion to be civil, mutually respectful. I really want to create the appearance of an option or decision and give you time to think about it, but I'm telling you once again, in reality, you've got neither options nor time, because we are the ones who've got the power. Practically, you are left with only the option of joining us. You should think about it. What could you do? Who would listen to you without thinking you were a madman? Freemasonry has always been a cult. It would have been against our real goals to claim paternity over all the great ideas, social and cultural trends, ideologies, or forward-thinking principles all over the world, although we are originators of a large majority of them. Instead, we have opted for discretion, mystery, retreat, and backstage dealing. There are only a few people who have ever heard about the term Mason or Freemason, and even if the word rings some faint bells with them, they don't have any idea about what it means in reality. This spell that we continue to weave so carefully has served us well over time. Given the circumstances, imagine anyone going out into the world and spreading the information I've just given you. Who would believe or listen to that person? You may be right, but do not ignore the force of a general opinion trend that could destroy everything you've built thus far, Cezar said, with lucidity. Oh, we're running out of time. Oh my goodness. Let's sum it up. One more paragraph. We are aware there already are many people, intellectuals in particular, who know at least part of the truth about us, and to whom we can no longer lie. But by comparison to the rest of the population who have been dumbed down by the social system we ourselves have created, and particularly by the information system we control almost completely, these people are really a minority. Moreover, they are dispersed and threatened by our indirect warnings. As it is, even if some people are aware of our real intentions, they will take a passive stance, thinking they're powerless, listless, and deprived of any possibility to act effectively. They then take the position of the lamenting victim. I know, but what can I do? What can we do? Our hands are tied. We are being controlled and watched in everything we do. I don't think any chance is left. And thus, a significant proportion of the population who could pose real difficulties and problems for us has already laid down arms before the battle has even begun. And if eventually someone attempts to attack us or tries to reveal the real nature of our actions to the ignorant, we can resort to a wide range of methods to pacify such a person. Our reactions are attentively conceived and rely on a thorough understanding of human psychology. This is almost always initiated by launching false or evil information about that person. As I was telling you, we have a very thorough control over the media. Suppose the information is released through a number of nationally distributed newspapers. The readers come across the respective false piece of information which has negative connotations. The harm is done. Whatever flat denial it would trigger on behalf of the accused party in the following days. First, it is very likely that the same reader would not read the ensuing denial, therefore keeping in mind the memory of the first reading. Although the content of the information is untrue, the reader's perception of the target of the article remains a negative one. Then we must exploit as much as possible the vicious tendency of modern society represented by its sick thirst for sensational headlines exhibiting evil situations or characters. We are well aware of both the influence and the terrible impact of such suggestions on the emotional nature of humans. We do know that evil suggestions destroy the harmonious energy structures of the aura and bring about a subtle form of stress at psychical level. We also know that they lower the frequency of positive perceptions and affect the beneficial intentions of humans. These perfectly serve our intentions as they exhaust people, diffuse their attention, weaken their alert mind, and blur the far-sightedness of their spirit. Thus we achieve the very goal we consistently aimed at, increasing the social entropy. I even dare say that it is us who have raised this skill close to perfection to achieve the social entropy, which triggers a rather total social confusion. We always put to use conflicting items of information on the same issue that is disseminated by various media, seasoning the issue with awful or lugubrious connotations. We therefore subsidize and promote works centered around childish or fanciful subjects. They all have a great appeal, though, to the narrow-minded person looking for the sensational. It is us who premiered this mechanism and fueled the proliferation of such books aiming at the public's acceptance, and they actually ended by appreciating these works. Oh my God, it just goes on and on. It's fascinating. I will come back. This is getting rather long, and I will probably finish this chapter tomorrow and get into what might be considered the metaphysical relationship, the metaphysical aspect, which is in fact very real, the dynamic between good and evil. But to me, this is an amazing chapter, and I wish you all well, and keep your vibrational level high. Do whatever you have to do. Meditate, exercise, and I will see you next time.